This topic of replaying things or wanting to check some stories once again has been covered in the channel. There's been some interesting discussions and different points of views, but have you ever felt that some games were better the second round you play them? I don't know, I like to associate it with something like reheated pozole. The first time you eat it, it is good, but the next day, it hits you even better. Okay, that is the idea of this vid. Some RPGs I'm really glad I replayed 2, 3 or more times, and the experience was much better. Now this peculiar feeling of course will vary from person to person, this is just my experience, but if you have had this feeling with some other games, let us know in the comments below. Without further ado, and no particular order, let's begin. I want to open with an entry that is simply amazing. Shin Megami Tensei Devil Survivor. Some of you know parts of my story with this game. I had no idea what it was, the dude in the store had no idea what it was, and the next day I was playing this thing. But the deal with this game is that the way in which the story is handled is quite amazing. Characters, the setting, how everything turns worse and worse along the natural reactions from the NPCs. Okay, I was engrossed with this game, but my first route was perhaps not the best. Obviously, younger me had no idea about this game, but for those who have played it, chances are that you saw a premature ending, where the team actions weren't the best. Sure, the ending was good, like hey dude, those were your choices, but along this, there was a kind of hollow feeling, something telling you there were more challenging things ahead, as if this whole crusade was abruptly cut. Sure, things could have been delivered in a different way, but this bittersweet flavor was like, I gotta check what is ahead. In a certain way, that ending helped to understand some beginning mechanics, cause later in other routes the game turns rather challenging, but much more entertaining, and that is how I got every single ending in this game. I still have the 3DS entry pending, but someday. The idea is to also check those new features and extra day. In any case, that was my experience with this extraordinary entry. Castlevania Symphony of the Night is a game you cannot just leave in one playthrough. Yeah, people had no idea it existed, but later everyone talked about it left and right. However, this thing had multiple secrets, and perhaps when I first played it, things were hidden, because of course, for someone who had to use a heavy-arse dictionary to play, sometimes puzzles were rather challenging, especially when there are little descriptions that you didn't want to read. So, as many of you, the first time I finished this thing it was like, okay, it is good, it is enjoyable, but something didn't feel right. Until in the second round, I started to translate every single interaction, I checked most items, and things were clearer like, see-through illusions. Crappy item you don't really give attention, but if you just equip it and move forward, of course, things change. And looking at that animation was like, oh, seems like I got a bad ending. So going through this whole crusade was rather amazing. Needless to mention that many of those bosses handled my sorry arse multiple times. There were interesting challenges and enemies with puzzles, let's call them in that way. But more importantly, even after finishing this thing 6 times, there were more and more secrets, sometimes going from person to person like, hey, did you know that you can go out of the castle? Did you know that you need to turn into a wolf, go back and forth?
Hey, listen!
The shield rod isn't useless. Puedes cholear el juego, carnal, or in other words, keep your equipment. This is a game that the more you play it, trying to go out of conventional ways, more and more tricks appeared. Hidden rooms, magics that needed precise input, funny ways to finish bosses, cheesy weapons, hidden enemies, etc, etc. I had a similar feeling with Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. Knowing Iga was behind this game, of course you knew things weren't as simple as that. So in late replays I was passing through walls and breaking the game in the funniest of ways, as well as dealing with the first randomized impossible seeds where you needed to glitch the game. So yeah, this is another entry I love so much because of numerous secrets left and right. Nights in the Nightmare is another of those entries where I had no idea what it was, but it looked mysterious, a completely different aesthetic, and not gonna lie, the first time that tutorial window appeared it was like, shice, it is going to be one of those. I got moped around by some bosses, and the general gameplay was rather convoluted to say the least. Somehow I was able to reach that chapter where there is a big coffin, and yeah, things weren't going that well. So at first it was thrown into the little pile of abandoned games. Later, I gave it another try, and things were clearer, as if all the previous experiences were engraved and I was enjoying the story, lore, getting every single item to recruit characters and get special weapons and so on. Yes, there are enemies that can be so annoying that you need to pull some amazing reflexes. Some of you already know I was into bullet hells. They are rather interesting. But the deal is that, after finishing this game, something also felt incomplete. The second round was all or nothing, and that is when I fell in love with this inquisitive experience. I know it is so unconventional in many ways, but that weird idea was the one that hooked me. Fusing souls, constantly having to change formations, collecting every single item to interact with the enemies, and have a chance in that masochistic difficulty. It was a whole crusade, but I loved it. And talking about weird experiences, it is a good moment to share a bit more about Dust 514, a weird first-person shooter with RPG elements. Back when I first played this thing, not gonna lie, I was hesitant because the beta didn't have that many players, so it was mostly running around with few souls, and it kinda shocked my usual perception of first-person shooters. I knew I was aiming properly and landing shots, but more often than not things were not going that well. Of course, within competitive gaming, I have those bitter moments where I'm a sore loser. So later, I tried it once again, and that is where I got to see these weird things. While at first there weren't that many options, those 4 basic drop suits were enough to bring countless possibilities. Do you want to play with armor, shield, rely on nanohives, sneaky scouts, support units with links, repairers, dropships, tanks? And as time passed, things became more and more complex, to a point where I simply love to see multiple scenarios, those small combinations, and not so usual ways to play, to a point where I was proficient enough to fight several players at the same time. But not gonna lie, this game was all about understanding as many mechanics as possible, from just a little peek to the enemy data, to silly loadouts to troll people. Yes, I don't regret what I said, those had a lot of issues, but my love for running numbers and possible scenarios was what hooked me into this game. Making uncomfy drop suits work was one of my passions. Bloodborne is another of those extraordinary entries you cannot just leave in one playthrough. When I first played this thing, I was getting moped around. Had no idea what the game tried to share, and somehow I woke up to live another day. The experience was rather unique, but kinda anticlimactic to say the least. The second time things definitely improved. At least I wasn't dying that many times, plus tried to find as many things as possible. So I took the exploration much more seriously, and while I found more details about the story and other elements, I was still far from the real challenges, but I was enjoying the experience with every playthrough. The third time is when I sat there for a good number of hours and started to create this whole story in my head like, seems like blood is important in this game. Okay, I got to understand in a better way the story and more or less what it meant. The little details of where certain items are found, the meaning behind the nightmare, among other things. That was on one side, because it took me some more time to more or less understand what was going on. However, the gameplay was getting better and better, because I got how to use the envelope, complete a quest I had no idea how to continue, and other details like that. The fact that you can beat some other enemies, and the many possible interactions between different NPCs is something I still love. But it was up until the 4th playthrough that I got how to get the real ending. And time later, that glorious DLC was thrown around, plus those silly challenges of match level 4. So yeah, this is another game that, at least in my case, became better and better because I was finding so many things. The story made sense, that killer soundtrack is beautiful, and its gameplay was, at least in my opinion, way better than freaking Kingsfield and Dark Souls. Etran Odyssey is another of those games I got to know because of dumb circumstances. And while at first I was fed up because of stupid butterfly ambushes, you know, they were the worst. Looking at your whole team get poisoned was like receiving a kick in the jewels. But there was something interesting in this game, remembering entries like wizardry after a good number of years, plus that stylus experience. But I still don't like the fact that this thing didn't explain what you needed to level up to get other skills. So that first playthrough was rough, real rough to say the least. The last FN area was out of the question. I didn't want to try it out. Eventually it was completed, but I didn't want to look at the game for a while. The second time I got to play this thing for the 3DS, I will say that it was a much better experience. Yep, in comparison to the DS entry, this thing is like playing it normal, plus adding some more little mechanics, and while it could be argued that they are rather different for a good number of reasons, this second experience was way better for me. Things didn't feel like everything was unforgiving, or perhaps that was the feeling because it is possible to see what you need to level up to unlock things, hence being prepared for different scenarios, rather than running blindly and check what happens or having to slowly grind with FOAs. From here, needless to say what was my general experience with this game. Rune Factory 4 is another entry I more or less knew something about, or at least I knew about the concept because of Tides of Destiny, but aside from that, not too much. Even the DS versions pass under my radar. The deal with this game is that I was overconfident with its general aesthetic, and of course hard difficulty was tempting, because otherwise it was going to be another walk in the park. It proved me wrong, and I am glad. Now, that first playthrough felt rough around the edges, because there were multiple mechanics I didn't understand that well, and while the whole experience was rather entertaining, once I replayed it not so long ago in the Switch with that dumb hell difficulty, my excitement pretty much skyrocketed. It is a similar case as other entries in this bid, and while it can be frustrating for some people, at least in my case, if I have some extra time to dive into numbers, possible solutions and so on, I enjoy these kinds of games much more. And the deal with the hell difficulty is that you need to be well prepared. There is a point where you do not casually finish a boss. You need to make multiple weapons, specifically train your pets to deal critical hits plus add ailments, and constantly improve your stuff or try to get rare forges to keep on moving forward. Needless to mention what happens in Rune Prank and this difficulty. And this game delivers quite well, because you need to think in every possible solution, and if you need to cook rocks to do something, then so be it. Cooked rocks will be. And last but not least, Fire Emblem Three Houses. I was really happy to see the franchise floating and get known. And sure, Awakening will always have a special place in my heart, as well as several previous entries, but this is the game I love to replay because each route is a rather unique experience. As some of you know, I'm the kind of person that doesn't really check on the media to get things, or at least I try to avoid that unless I'm stuck like those cave explorers. Because one of the routes opens under specific circumstances. Not that it is super hidden or something like that, but there are little details here and there that you will miss. And while some people disliked the school setting, in all honesty, that is what made this whole game better on that end, because you got to know every character, their motivations and identities, before jumping into that tragic second half. Well, in any case, I have a fascination for hard difficulty in strategic games, because they push you to see things out of the box, and this game was no exception. And while many others accomplished that quite well, in my case getting to know an amazing cast of characters, multiple silly interactions, as well as the truth behind this whole mess, is something I haven't experienced that well with other games out there. And sometimes there is that feeling of wanting to replay some other games once again, and chances are that some of those extraordinary experiences were buried with the pass of time, as we try to see or live different things at once. In any case, I usually wonder which game would be something interesting to check once again, but that is a discussion for another time. Thank you so much for watching.